Good morning to our viewers in the United States, and good afternoon to our viewers in Germany. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Kaffeepause. As many of you know, each week we check in with a Berlin-based journalist to talk about emerging stories and breaking news. And today I am delighted to be joined by Johannes Leithäuser, who covers politics for the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung from Berlin. Johannes, herzlich willkommen.
Good morning, Steve. Hello to you.
It's good to see you, and I am very much looking forward to our conversation today. You know, it is the summer break, which is often described as the Sommerloch, but that does not mean that there's a shortage of news to talk about. And I thought today, before we dive in, Johannes, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the Stimmung, the political mood in Berlin, and share with us what's on the minds of people, what their concerns are, as sort of government is taking a break, but also as there is daily news that's emerging that we're learning about.
Well, hello again. And yes, you are right. In former times, we used to have a Sommerloch. That was when journalistic stories were done out of swimming pools, or the summer heat was an issue in itself. That is an issue again, but related to climate change now. And there are two topics in these weeks. One is, of course, the war in Ukraine, and this is producing news every day. And linked to it is the question how Russia will behave regarding the delivery of fuels and of gas to Germany, and how we should react on that. And this again is linked to this climate change question as well, because the question is, well, what are we doing to combat the heating of the earth, and how urgent will it hit us? And we have the feeling in these summer days that we are really already amidst this global warming issue, because we have quite a substantial heat wave at the moment. So for politicians to answer, the question is how quick can we change to renewable energies, and how hard will be hit by Putin's deliberate switching on, switching off of natural gas supplies that we will have to endure in the wintertime, and may leave us cold then, whereas we are sweating now, and may hardly hit our economy.
So, Johannes, I thought it was interesting. I mean, obviously these topics are very interconnected, and these are issues that are of great concern, not just in Germany, but across Europe and in the United States, particularly as we deal with this heat wave and as we think about the fall and the winter. But it's interesting to also hear you describe what people are thinking about, because everything that you told us about is happening against the backdrop of the pandemic, which still has not gone away. And certainly in my circles, I'm constantly hearing of people who are getting sick. To what degree is COVID also a topic of discussion in Germany right now?
It's not in the foreground at the moment, but this can change any day as soon as the cases or the case count rises again, and as soon as hospitals could fill again with sick people, or as soon as another variant of the virus might be detected that behaves differently as the one that is now at the moment the dominant one. So we still have that, and it's still it will become for sure a political foreground topic again, because we have to renew the legislative basis for how to deal with COVID as soon as September. So we'll have to have a parliamentary debate, and the government has to make up its mind what kinds of measures they want to take, whether it will be hard measures again, back to lockdown. There's not much, I don't see this at the moment, but other restrictions like wearing face masks while shopping or being on a train, they are still in place on trains, by the way, that might come up. So it is a political issue that's looming, but not at the moment.
It's very interesting. Anecdotally, I was taking a train from Munich to Zurich, and as soon as we hit the Swiss border, everybody took their masks off. I thought it was very, very interesting to see that in Germany, of course, people have to wear masks on the trains, but it seems a little more laissez-faire in other places. And undoubtedly, COVID will be a topic for all of us in the fall and in the winter. But I want to come back to the issue of energy, because I think that's really the big topic. Late last week, the Vice Chancellor and the head of the Economics Ministry and Ministry for Energy Issues, Robert Habeck, said that the government is ramping up plans to conserve gas for the winter heating season. This comes despite the partial return of deliveries through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. The measures that Robert Habeck was talking about will require citizens to cut back on their energy consumption and even opt for alternative fuels like coal to make up for reduced gas usage. Can you talk a little bit about how sort of this warning from Robert Habeck is being received and how people are thinking about their energy usage with a view to the fall?
Well, if you allow me a generalization, I think Germans love to be scared, and so the politicians are fulfilling this underlying unconscious wish we have. I think, well, it's right of the government to do everything to be prepared, and so we have to, I think, make sure that we can use everything we have to have enough energy supply in winter times. So that is why now coal-powered power stations come in, and why we are even thinking about giving nuclear power stations that we still have got 3 on the grid, giving them a longer life. The government has taken already measures filling the gas storage facilities we've got. That was an issue as far back as March already. So the topic is constantly on the front pages, because every day there's something happening. You see, there's this, the pipelines out of Russia are down for maintenance, so we don't get Russian gas. The question is, will they ever be opened again? So now they have been reopened, but only for half capacity. Putin's excuse is there's a turbine lacking that was out for maintenance in Canada. We convinced the Canadians to give it back despite the sanctions they have got against Russia. Now it will be delivered to Russia again, and then we'll see what happens. So Putin is able at least to keep the suspense every day, and we are blindly following this theme that he sets. It's a bit silly, but that is due, if you like, to a kind of Sommerloch, because it's the only issue at hand now.
So one of the things that I heard as I was listening to Deutschlandradio over the weekend is that the head of the Bundesnetzagentur, which is the federal infrastructure agency, for lack of a better term, had said that he does not think that Germany will be able to fill its gas reserves to the 80 to 90% that had been hoped for by the fall. So here too, you have another government official who's sort of expressing concern over Germany's energy availability and capacity, and so I'm wondering, how worried are people in the public about being able to heat their homes, heat their apartments come winter?
I think they are. The main concern is not that there will be no gas, but the main concern is it will be unaffordable. because the prices are rising so high. And I don't think anyone can clearly predict what will happen. The gloomist forecasts come from the big German industry hubs, like the chemical industry, BASF. They are by far, I think, the greatest user of natural gas for their chemical productions. And they are highly alarmed that they will have to shut down part of their product lines in winter. The general public, I think, is more concerned about the cost of everything, the overall inflation, but definitely the prices of energy, and that's petrol as well as gas supply for their homes. And I think this is the government's biggest concern as well. We're talking a lot about supply, but underlying is the question about price.
So related to that, and just efforts by the government, Olaf Scholz interrupted his summer holiday to announce the bailout of a gas company called Uniper on Friday. Basically, the German government is going to spend over 15 billion and take a 30% stake in this company that was very close to collapse. And at the same time, Olaf Scholz used this as an opportunity to announce further relief measures on a permanent basis to help protect citizens from increasing energy prices. Is this doing enough to sort of calm people's concerns?
I think no one can say this, but I think this appearance of Olaf Scholz that you mentioned out of his holidays was a bit of a staged event. And seeing that obviously the government felt the necessity to present the chancellor on this kind of emergency appearance gives you a hint how serious the government takes these things. So they really have the impression that they have to switch into some kind of crisis mode to show the public that they are there all the time, that they are not away on holidays on some beaches or mountains, whatever, leading a life without sorrows for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but they are constantly on the watch. And this is, I think, a better indication than the figures that are impossible to predict. If climate change does not go away this winter, we will probably have a mild winter again. And we'll survive this without major difficulties. If we get a winter like the ones we have known in previous years with temperatures down to 10 degrees minus for a month, I think then we are in serious trouble.
But I guess one of the other interesting things that I found in this announcement by Scholz was that it seems to come in contrast to some things that Christian Lindner, the finance minister, and head of the Free Democratic Party, was saying last week, who said that the very rigid fiscal planning leaves little space for more support packages for citizens. And so I'm curious, he had pledged fiscal discipline for Germany, and yet Germany is spending lots of money both on energy and on defense. How is this sort of playing out for Lindner and for the Free Democratic Party? But also, are there new tensions that we should be looking at within the governing coalition?
I think you're right that this has not been talked through within the three coalition parties to the end. And there might be some bitter disputes coming up within the coalition, especially between the Social Democrats and the FDP, the Liberals, and their party chairman and finance minister, Christian Lindner. And you get the impression that Olaf Scholz, the chancellor, really loves to govern by surprise. You see, when the war in Ukraine started, 3 days later, he gave this speech to the Bundestag announcing this now famous word Zeitenwende, which was more a turning for the Social Democrats than for the whole political landscape in Germany, because the Christian Democrats that now get often all the blame for having neglected Bundeswehr, they were not very keen on backing defense issues, but they had tied hands because they were always governing with the Social Democrats that hadn't any appetite to spend money on Bundeswehr and defense matters. So Olaf Scholz did this in February, and at that time it was the Greens, the second coalition partner, that were quite unprepared of what was happening. And the own party, the Social Democrats, their left wing was taken by surprise that Scholz suddenly said, we need 100 billion euros for the Bundeswehr and we will deliver weapons to Ukraine. In this case now, he has made this surprise appearance last Friday and has said there will be all kinds of support. He didn't really specify. The only specification he made was that this gas supply Uniper would be saved with up to 30 billion euros. So yes, he's giving away the money with full hands, and I don't think that the finance minister has talked this through with him in all details. And an indication for that is that the finance minister himself announced that next year there will be tax cuts for people with low incomes and medium incomes. And God knows how he's going to pay for this all under the condition that still this Schuldenbremse, the very limited allowance to make new debt, should kept in place or reinstated, that we have had for a decade now, and that has been suspended for 2 years because of pandemic and because of the war in the Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, I think watching the debt break is going to be very interesting, because this has been an important tenet of German financial policy and fiscal policy, and to say that the debt break is being sort of suspended for the next 2 years does make a difference, but it has a lot to do, I think, with obviously with the extenuating circumstances of the war in Ukraine, and now this ensuing energy crisis, which has been exacerbated through that. Let me just ask you one question though about Lindner and his FDP before moving on, and that is, what's the sort of standing of his party at the moment? He had made some strong promises when he came into this office, and he really wanted to bring his party into the government. Recently, there have been some new sort of rumors that have come out about Christian Lindner related to Porsche, that he had sort of shared some inside information from the coalition negotiations with the head of Porsche. And this comes after all sides really feeling like they had been working together to keep the information amongst themselves, to not share too much information outside. Many of the journalists that I spoke with during the coalition negotiations said, the government parties are doing an amazing job of sort of keeping quiet and focusing on the issues themselves, and not much is being leaked out. But now there's news that maybe there were some leaks. How is that sort of impacting Lindner and the FDP?
It's not clearly to predict yet. I think the issue you mentioned is not very serious as regarding its potential being a scandal or being seriously harming Lindner, but it can be dangerous for him and for the Liberal Party because it just ticks some boxes. You see, the CEO of a motor company and of the most prestigious one, namely Porsche, has been in telephone contact with the FDP chairman during coalition talks. I don't think they've spoken about anything that might have influenced the way decisions were made or this coalition treaty was drafted. because the position that Lindner took was well known at the time already, and it was all about the question: is only are only electric cars to have a future, or will we try to get synthetic fuels as well that are made from biomass or other renewable sources? Should they be included? And that was an election campaign pledge of Lindner that should be the case. So I think he wanted to show off a little to this Porsche CEO, and then unluckily the Porsche CEO had shown off last week to his workers when in a workers' meeting he gave the impression that he had been in contact with Lindner almost every hour in the crucial days of the treaty negotiations. And unluckily again, exactly this manager is now going to be the new head of VW, the biggest motor company producer we have in Germany. So he is already a bit damaged coming into his new job. It's more of a fun thing than of a serious problem or ongoing there. But as the liberals are always in danger to be seen as the party of the rich, it is dangerous for Christian Lindner to give the impression that he was a close buddy of this Porsche boss. And by the way, he just recently was boasting that he had an old Porsche himself, Lindner, and that he liked to drive in his own Porsche. So it's not good for his image, but I don't think over time it will do him much harm.
It sounds like this might fade, that this might be, one of the old school Sommerloch stories.
Exactly. It might fall in this category, yeah.
So before we take a couple of viewer questions, while we're talking about politics, I'd also like to ask you about the opposition. In about 6 weeks is the party conference of the CDU, the Christian Democrats, and there's been some pressure from the conservative wing of the CDU to put pressure on the party head, Friedrich Merz. What are your thoughts on what's going on within the CDU right now, on Merz's efforts to sort of bring the party back after the significant losses in the Bundestag, in the federal election in September of last year?
Well, I think at the moment you can be more surprised that there's so little going on in terms of internal criticism, because Merz was not quite well liked when he won the election, being party chairman or party leader. He was liked by the members because they voted him in finally after he had lost 2 times before. But he is not very well liked in, let's say, the medium management of the party, within the parliamentary faction, for instance. But they all keep quiet now, and they all let him do his job as the opposition leader, and he is doing quite okay, I would say. He has got signs of a new outfit. He has got new glasses. He has changed his public appearance a bit. He's less aggressive. In this emergency situation that we are still in regarding the war in Ukraine going on, and we are in a way threatened as well, he tries to be constructive, but still is able to make points or to show some weakness of the government, them not reacting fast enough, far enough. And I think his people are watching this and they are content with him for the moment, but all that could well change before the next general election. There will be some issues coming up where you will see the wide range of the Christian Democrats between trying to be a social modern party and liberal conservative party. the part that women play in the party might be one issue, but there will be others as well.
So thank you for that. I'd like to fold in a viewer question. One of our viewers here in New York writes, how is public sentiment in Germany regarding high inflation, with not just energy prices high, but broad price increases in other consumer categories? She goes on to ask, is the press chronicling an economic slowdown? And is this likely to become a political issue, i.e., is the public directly blaming the government for this situation, or is the war in Ukraine and Russia being blamed for this?
I think that's clearly a point, because inflation historically in Germany is an overwhelming issue. We had this hyperinflation at the beginning of the last century after the Germans lost World War I, and the new republic was from the beginning crippled by not being able to guarantee any kind of stability for the money. And that was seen as one of the, well, the middle class lost their property entirely, and that was clearly one of the effects that in the end brought Hitler to power 20 years or 15 years later. So inflation is a sign of alarm in Germany far more for different reasons than in many other countries. At the moment, I do have the impression, but I might be wrong, that people don't really have grasped that this is going to happen. I mean, they see higher prices when they go to the supermarkets. And yes, it's not only petrol and energy supplies, it's fruits, apples, everyday staples as well. Even the price for porridge has gone up in recent weeks. So you see this, but on the other hand, I think deplorably, in many occasions, it's just the companies that produce and the retail sellers that sell trying to ride on this horse and make a bit of a quick profit here, because you see prices coming down as well at discounters, for instance. So I think many people hope that the wave will be over by autumn, and they might be able just to avoid the worst. If that shouldn't be the case, then the government will get into serious trouble. On the other hand, already now, that was one of the messages the Chancellor gave on Friday, last Friday, when he did this surprise appearance out of his holiday. He used this English football song, "You'll Never Walk Alone," reassuring the public that things wouldn't be too hard for them. How he is going to keep this promise is totally, I'm at a loss how he might be able to do this, because this would even be far above what the German budget can deliver. So I think even Olaf Scholz hopes that the worst will be over by autumn.
And we'll have to see just how long this all drags out, right? Because I think a lot of people think that this will not be resolved quickly and not be resolved easily. And in that vein, we've had a couple of questions come in that have to do with the war in Ukraine and with Russia and with Putin. And so I'd like to maybe spend a few minutes addressing some of these viewer questions and talking with you about that. One of our viewers from the Washington, D.C. area writes, how strong is German public support for backing Ukraine and supplying it with weapons and humanitarian assistance? How strong is support for pressuring Ukraine to make a deal with Russia and end the war, assuming that's possible, right? These are two very different questions, but they have to do with what's the public sentiment in Germany right now vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine.
This is really hard to judge, I have to say. In my opinion, or what I'm sensing, is that still a majority follows an overwhelming majority of the politicians saying, well, this is our freedom at stake as well, and we have to stand by Ukraine delivering weapons as well as sending humanitarian aid. And I think we could do more in weapon-wise, but I think in giving money and humanitarian aid, we are doing a lot. And I think just this morning I had the figure that now the number of Ukrainians that came to Germany, they don't have to apply for asylum. They just can say, I want to, the refugees that want to stay here can stay here. And the number now has risen to 915,000 since February. Many of them might have already gone back, so nobody knows the exact figures. But I think solidarity is still high and we're doing a lot. There are differences between East and West Germany. Probably you will have talked about this already sometimes. Surprisingly, on the first glance, the East Germans are more skeptical, and there's more, I wouldn't say maybe support for Putin, but unsupport for Ukraine. And there's the wish is stronger to come to an agreement no matter what, and don't anger the Russians, and try to come to terms with them and let this whole thing rest. And that sometimes you see this in quite enigmatic words that, for instance, East German state premiers say. The other day we had the one from Saxony, a Christian Democrat, saying, well, this conflict should be frozen, which is a silly thing because you can't just order this to be frozen when the Russians are not willing to have anything frozen, but try to advance ever more, and admit now again that they want a regime change in Kiev. So this is, you can see this as an effort to please the public in their Bundesländer and the East German Länder. But I would say in general, the line holds, we have to help them by all means. We are not doing this by all means in the end, because we are a bit reluctant when it comes to heavy weapons, but I think we're doing quite okay.
Are there reasons for why some people are less supportive of Ukraine, or does it have more to do with the fact that they are just more supportive of Russia rather than that they're not being supportive of Ukraine?
I think there's an underlying general notion. There are many, or there are at least two camps, I would say. On the West German side, there is this old peace camp saying, look, we have done the worst to the world during the time of the Nazi period, so we'll never want to be involved in any of this again. And they form a kind of moral superstition that keeps them out of the game. But they are part of an ongoing debate in intellectual circles in West Germany, and I think they are clearly seen as a minority by now. In East Germany, things are different because they're not easily to explain. There's a certain fondness of Russia that has survived the GDR, the East German Republic. And although they had Russian occupation for 40 years, and I've seen the 500,000 Russian soldiers in East Germany when I came first to East Germany with my own eyes. And there has been a kind of official friendship from the communist side in East Germany towards the Russians, but that has not been felt very, very thoroughly by the population then. But now it has a kind of late side effect. And I think some East Germans tend to say, well, we know better about these Russians than you West Germans do. So you don't tell us how Putin is like, and we want to make our own judgment about this.
So I have two viewer questions that tie in very nicely with what you were just saying. And one viewer is curious to know sort of how the general public in Germany is responding to or reacting to Putin's actions regarding energy supply. You were talking a little bit earlier about how Putin is keeping us on our toes, particularly with Nord Stream 1. And this viewer goes on to pose the question, are these various actions and threats seen as a form of blackmail or something else by the German public?
I personally would take it as a blackmail, you see, and I didn't have any illusions about this guy before, but now I would clearly say he tries just to coerce us into things we wouldn't like to do, win us over, intimidate. I think it's a sign of trying to intimidate the public. Has this an effect? I would say it has more of an anti-effect than an effect. I think he loses more than he gains by that. And more and more people would start to think, well, we shouldn't have done this in the first place. Now we got between 30 and 40% of our natural gas from Russia. That was a big mistake. Is there support for getting rid of this as soon as we can? Definitely yes, and overwhelmingly so. We are building now the liquid gas terminals at the German coast that could have been there 10 years or 15 years before. There are all kinds, normally there would be all kinds of environmental restrictions. They are scrapped now, and I don't think no one is going to protest for that, except some die-hard natural environmentalists who say, look, you can't do this now just because of war is going on. But I think the overwhelming public would say that all is okay and we should never touch this guy again.
Another viewer is interested in hearing more about Wandel durch Handel, or this notion of change through trade. He writes that Merkel's only public statement on this matter since leaving office did not seem to sort of spur any public debate. And he asks whether it's now widely accepted that the policy was a failure, or it's just sort of, well, that's in the past, we need to move on to the future.
That's hard to say, because I think the bigger debate is still to have had in regard to China. And when it comes to Russia, I don't think that really it was the economic foray of the Western world and of Germany, especially, that we had put many hopes on. It was there we thought we would be culturally very close, and they would adopt automatically democratic standards and means that we had used in the West for many years. And it's funny that Putin now is claiming this example of Peter the Great in his speeches, because I think in a Western mood, this former Tsar could have set an example as well. He came to the West to learn Western manners and means, and he went everywhere to the Netherlands and to Germany. And we thought in the 90s that we could have this again. The Russians would come, we would help them, teach them, and they would be a perfect European modernized country in there. And of course, economy would have played a part in it. So Handel durch Wandel, yes, it was an example, but they were not so alien to us anyway. And more interesting, I think, we thought of conversing China by this method. And this has clearly failed as well. And the consequences, the economic consequences of this failure for the German economy will be far larger than the ones we now have to endure in respect to Russia. So there has been no great debate on Merkel's remark that she believed in this principle, but it had failed because she believed in this principle in regard to China as well. And when this is going to fail massively because there might be a political conflict with Taiwan or other ongoings, then we'll be in trouble.
I mean, I think this is the big story that we'll be watching in the months to come, is how Germany's policy toward China might be impacted by lessons learned from this experience with Russia right now. The German government is working on a China policy, which is expected to be released at the end of the year. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But of course, industry plays a huge role in that as well. As we start to sort of wind up our conversation, there are a couple other topics I'd like to get to. We spent a fair amount of time talking a little bit about the energy conundrum that Germany finds itself in. One of our viewers just sent in a question asking, related to energy supply, has there been any sort of impact in Germany or any response in Germany to President Biden's recent visit to the Middle East? Is that something that was followed closely? Of course, German government officials have been traveling to the Middle East as well. At the top of the list has been Robert Habeck to cut some new deals that have been somewhat controversial in Germany. But has there been sort of, how closely was President Biden's visit to the Middle East followed?
I think we paid very much attention, and just for the reasons you mentioned, because we are in this moral dilemma as well and we, of course, want to see how the US is solving this problem that you are in an economic need to shake hands with Saudi princes you condemned only a short while ago because of their cruel violations of human rights. And it is a debate, but it's not in the foreground. So as you said, Robert Habeck, the economics minister, went to Qatar to talk about gas supplies. And there again are human rights issues. And many people would have said, oh, we can't do deals with these people because they have blood on their hands. But that's now went well into the background because of the problems we have got. And so I think Biden's visit was in many ways interesting because Germany always follows things in the Middle East closely. And the ongoings between Israel and the Gulf states and the efforts of creating a better understanding there and a piece of peace, to put it that way, are very much in the German interest and followed in Germany as well. But also very prominently featured was the summit that the Turkish President Erdogan, the Iranian president, and President Putin held in Tehran last week. And that was because this has definitely to be seen as quite a scary moment to see that in this multipolar world, different powers can try to form alliances that are clearly against the Western interest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point. You touched on this a little bit earlier, and I want to come back to it briefly because I think this is one of the big stories that people should be watching in the weeks ahead, namely the extending the life of the remaining nuclear power plants in Germany. Over the past months, and even 2 weeks ago, in a conversation I was a party to with a senior government politician, it seems as if there's little appetite to extend the life of the remaining nuclear power plants. But suddenly, over the last few days even, this seems to be changing. There's talk about conducting a new stress test within the Ministry of Economic Affairs to see if the power plants could be kept online. Last night on Anna Will, the vice president, or one of the vice presidents of the Bundestag, Katrin Göring-Eckardt, who's in the Green Party, indicated that the plants might stay online beyond the end of 2022. You mentioned before we went live that your paper had a big story about sort of some of the divides between the older generation and the younger generation, about how energy should be sourced. And so I'm curious, how do you see this debate over the nuclear power plants unfolding in the next few months? Because really there's a lot of pressure building up to make a decision.
Well, if you look at the facts, there shouldn't be a big debate about this at all, because there are 3 nuclear power stations remaining in Germany from, I don't know, about 20 we once had. We are clearly on the way out of nuclear power, and this is on the short or medium term irreversible. And the only question now is, should they run for 9 months or a year longer? Just to ease the pressure a little on the lacking gas supply we have during winter, and having an alternative energy source. But connected to this technical question is a huge ideological question, and this goes right to the core, at least of the Green Party, who is now in government, because one of their founding issues was the anti-nuclear movement. And so the older generation in the Greens is not, they had to concede so many things now. They had to give up their pacifistic core notions and agree to deliver weapons to Ukraine. And they are not prepared now to give away another of their holy principles regarding nuclear energy. And this is why the debate started with the position, by no means are we extending the life of the 3 remaining power stations that were due to close down in December. On the other hand, the younger generation within the Green Party, but general, is more interested in the effects of climate change. And they say, well, hang on, before we bring back to power coal-fired power stations that should be switched off already or were due to be switched off, we can more easily let these nuclear energy go on for a little longer than the other way around. And so the government and the opposition and some of the coalition partners, the FDP, one of the coalition partners, sees a little fissure there where they can put their finger in and say, well, there's a weakness of the government. And so we're having a nice political debate on an issue that's not very controversial in technical terms, but has a huge ideological meaning to some of those concerned with it.
Well, it will be fascinating to see how that story plays out. And as we've talked about today, there are a number of stories worth watching in the weeks and months ahead. Johannes, I want to thank you for taking the time today to talk with us. This has been a wonderful discussion. And I think it's fair to say there's anything but a Sommerloch. You have your finger on the pulse of all of the important issues. And I look forward to connecting with you again, perhaps in the fall, to continue the conversation.
Sure. Thank you for this patient listening for you and all the guests here. And bye-bye to New York.
Take care. Stay well, Johannes.
Cheers. Bye.